Welcome to Railroading Lore, History, and More. We will be chasing trains and chasing stories about the golden age of railroading. Hobos, haunts, and history are all included in your ticket price. In 1528, Cabeza de Vaca and his men were washed ashore near a spot called Three Trees on Galveston Island. The Three Trees site was situated on a ridge in the center of the island, and it was at this spot where the Spaniards first came in contact with the Carancagua Indians. For centuries, the spot had been a campsite and gathering spot for these semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers. Cabeza de Vaca and many of his companions were taken hostage by the natives and kept as slaves for a while, but that's a whole nother story. Yet another story recalls the battle at Three Trees. In 1817, there was a bloody three-day skirmish between the Carancaguas and the notorious French pirate and privateer Jean Lafitte and his crew. Lafitte had established a base on the island earlier that year. The battle ended tragically for the Native Americans. Lafitte proclaimed himself as the governor of Galveston and traded with smugglers and merchants alike. Lafitte's Grove was the name given to the site of Three Trees in 1821 after the United States Navy raided Lafitte's stronghold and evicted the pirate. There is a legend that Lafitte left treasure buried at Three Trees. Another story tells of a doctor named Purnell who, along with a team of treasure hunters, came to Lafitte's Grove to find the pirates' loot. Instead, they found 200 cranky Carancaguas. This encounter ended tragically for the treasure hunters. Lafitte's treasure has never been found. What does all of this have to do with railroading lore? Little Susie was the only train to ever reach Lafitte's Grove. Chartered in 1875, the Galveston, Brazos, and Colorado Narrow Gauge Railroad ran from Galveston's wharves through her city streets to Lafitte's Grove, about 12 miles from the city limits. There were high hopes of turning the GBC into a major railroad. It was proposed to travel westward from the city of Galveston, cross West Bay at Carancagua or Carancagua Reef, then westward it was to cross the Brazos River at Freeport. Then it was to follow the Colorado River into Austin and then on into Mexico. The first bike was driven in 1876. The railroad faced many challenges throughout its existence, including legal battles and the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. She would become a popular excursion train hauling passengers to visit the island's many resorts and attractions along its route. In addition to the excursions, the train would haul sand into the city for use in low-lying areas, and she would also serve various industries. Unfortunately, the railroad was never extended beyond the island. The islanders loved the train and thought of it as their own. Now the railroad has mostly been forgotten. An old edition of the Galveston Daily News posted an article that recounted the Galveston, Brazos, and Colorado Narrow Gauge Railroad as having 3 locomotives, 4 passenger cars, 2 hopper cars, and 58 freight cars. Other sources say there were a number of flat cars that had benches mounted on them for use on excursions. One of the locomotives was named Little Susie in honor of Mayor Charles W. Hurley's youngest daughter. Another engine was known as Maggie, and the name of the third engine is unknown. Soon the entire railroad will be affectionately known as Little Susie. There are 2 accounts by Maury Darst describing the first locomotive on the line as a double-ended switch engine with cowcatchers or pilots on the front and rear, and that was the Little Susie locomotive. I tend to believe this version. I also believe Susie may have been a Porter-built engine. Included with one of the above articles is a photo of a Baldwin 440 claiming to be Little Susie. This is how she's been depicted in drawings and art. H.K. Porter and H.N. Sprague of Pennsylvania were owners of the line's 3 engines. I wonder why the builder of Porter locomotives would be leasing out Baldwins. There were a lot of failing narrow gauge lines in Texas during the time period, and there may have been a surplus of Baldwins available for Porter to purchase and then to lease out. Mayor Charles W. Hurley was a prominent figure in Galveston's history. He came to Galveston in 1867 following the war between the states and was involved in various steamship lines between Galveston and Liverpool, England. He even shipped the first cargo of Texas cattle to Liverpool. While serving as Galveston's mayor, he led street paving projects and public improvements in the city. In 1875, Hurley and his associates chartered the Galveston, Brazos, and Colorado Narrow Gauge Railroad. Mr. Hurley passed away on October 17, 1887, at the age of 50, leaving behind his wife and 5 children: Frank, Charles, W.H., Lotta, and Little Susie. A letter dated May 25, 1950, from the Railroad Commission of Texas to Mr. Walter E. Grover of Galveston recalled the following. From 1876 to 1877, the GB&C constructed 15 miles of 3-foot narrow gauge railway. The roadbed was built with a base of sand and 6-foot-long ties made of yellow pine, 6 to 8 inches on a side. The rails were new and of American manufacture, 30 pounds per yard. The gauge was 3 feet. The first 5 miles were completed October 6, 1876, and commenced on 10th Street and Avenue N, then west on N to 37th Street, south on 37th Street to T, west on T to the city limits. The railroad would then follow the city limits line to a point opposite of V, then head west and southwest. The second 5-mile section was completed December 14, 1876, and consisted of extensions at both ends of the first 5-mile section. The road was extended east on N to 9th Street and north on 9th Street to L. The other end was extended westward to make a total of 10 miles. The third section was completed July 9, 1877, for a total of 15 miles from Avenue A to Lafitte's Grove. Just a side note, Karankawa, Karankawa. There are several ways to pronounce and spell the people's name. I will stick to Karankawa. The railroad company was unable to finance a proposed bridge to span West Bay at Karankawa Reef. The GB&C was also denied permission to use the existing Galveston, Houston, and Henderson Railway Bridge to Virginia Point. Therefore, the line remained limited to the island. What were the sights that could be seen along the route? Let's take a trip on the Little Susie. The northern terminus was on 9th Street near Galveston Bay at Avenue A, or Water Street, now called Harborside Drive. To the north, steamships and sailboats could be seen along the wharves on Galveston Bay. From the northern terminus, the train would travel south on 9th Street to pick up riders at Market Street, where there was a connection with the city railway. Then she would travel past St. Mary's Infirmary, a block to the east on Post Office Street. When crossing Winnie Street, one of the city's public squares was situated a couple of blocks to the west. A few blocks south was another connection to the city railway on Broadway. On the south end of 9th Street, Susie would turn west onto a curved trestle, passing over the beach to enter Avenue N. Traveling west along the busy city street, she would stop for riders at the Sam Mass store on 21st Street, which served as an unofficial depot. At this intersection, there was another connection with the city railway system. Passengers could buy train tickets and rest under a covered area while enjoying ice cream and refreshments. After a call of all aboard and 2 toots of the whistle, the train would depart westward, chugging past the Texas Cotton Press on Bath Street, now known as Rosenberg. Just beyond that, on the south side of the tracks, was the stately Ursuline Convent. On the next block came the Garden Vereen at Kempner Park, which is still there today. A couple more blocks west on the north side of the tracks, between 30th and 31st, was the engine house and the turntable. The train would stop there to replenish the fuel and water for the locomotive, then depart west. Little Susie soon turned south on 37th Street. Another stop would let off riders to visit Williams Lake, just a couple of blocks to the west. Soon to the south, the Gulf of Mexico came back into view. Turning west, the train would pass just below Lakeview Cemetery. Then the journey took the riders west for about 12 miles along the coast, passing the Gulf shore, bayous, and sand pits from where the sand was quarried. Finally, Little Susie rolled up to our destination, the picnic area at Lafitte's Grove. Despite being popular with the Galvestonians, the line continued to struggle financially, and in 1878 it would be leased to Drennan, Sullivan and Company, who held claims for construction expenses. Daniel Sullivan sued H.K. Porter and H.N. Sprague for $11,585 in specific damages. Allegedly, when Drennan and Sullivan leased the railroad, they secured the rights to use the Maggie and the Little Susie locomotives from a Pittsburgh firm owning the engines, of which Sprague and Porter were partners. As soon as Drennan and Sullivan took possession of the railroad, the connecting rods of the engine Maggie were taken away, rendering Maggie useless and causing damages to the plaintiff. Drennan and Sullivan would end up going out of business. By 1881, the railroad had fallen into bankruptcy and was sold for $5,000 to Charles S. Henchman of Philadelphia, who represented the bondholders. Mr. Henchman in turn sold the GB&C to the Texas Mexican Railway Company for $60,000. The Tex-Mex was run by the Palmer-Sullivan Syndicate, who planned to connect to the line between Corpus Christi and Laredo. They also intended to extend the line into Mexico via the Mexican National Railway Company. Palmer of the Palmer-Sullivan Syndicate was none other than William Jackson Palmer, who started his career as a railroad man at age 15. He became a Civil War general and was elected president of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in 1870. And in 1880 he became president of the Mexican National Railway. At the time, the Tex-Mex was a branch of the larger Mexican National. When competition in the form of the International Great Northern Railroad reached Laredo, the Galveston extension was deemed too expensive and never came together. The Palmer-Sullivan Syndicate soon went out of business. The Galveston Daily News reported that the Tex-Mex version of the Little Susie was sold by Sheriff Pat Tiernan to satisfy a judgment obtained in Webb County District Court for $150,181 in favor of the Mexican National Construction Company, which was headed by Palmer. In 1887, the property was transferred to the Galveston Western Railway. December 9, 1887, Walter Henchman and his associates formed the Galveston and Western Railway. The idea was to connect Galveston to the Texas Mexican Railway Company, forming a line to Collins, Texas, 60 miles west of Laredo. 13 miles of new track would be laid and would follow most of the original GB&C route through the Galveston streets and onto Lafitte's Grove. Although part of the defunct GB&C would be scrapped, new trackage would be added. The new railway would utilize rail that weighed 56 pounds per yard in anticipation of an early conversion to standard gauge. Unable to finance the Tex-Mex connection, Little Susie remained limited to the island. The new railroad was built from 1888 to 1889. The GB&C tracks along 37th and Avenue T to the south of Lakeview Cemetery were removed. New tracks would be placed on Avenue N from 37th Street to 43rd Street, where the line came to a turnaround Y with a leg going north, passing along the Broadway cemeteries to Avenue E, and a leg going south to Avenue Q where the tracks turned west to 57th Street, then southwest to meet up with the existing right-of-way headed west to Lafitte's Grove. 5 miles of 3-rail track were laid to facilitate connections with the standard gauge railroad. Little Susie was rolling again. H.W. Trueheart would become the director of the line in 1891. From the establishment of the Galveston, Brazos, and Colorado Narrow Gauge Railroad, and continuing beyond the inception of the Galveston and Western Railway, the city of Galveston experienced significant growth. The railroad's 3 new rail extensions facilitated easier cargo exchange with the standard gauge railroads. This development also benefited businesses that needed raw materials and produced goods for shipment. Despite a promising future and popularity among the majority of the populace, Little Susie faced increasing opposition. City leaders and some citizens were growing weary of the noise and hazards associated with the steam train puffing through the city streets. Additionally, the burgeoning electric streetcar lines were not fond of the competition for riders and the shared use of the city streets. As a result, lawsuits ensued and politicians campaigned on an anti-Susie platform. In June of 1889, the Galveston and Western experienced a boom when the city held a 12-day semi-centennial festival to celebrate the founding of Galveston 50 years prior. The celebration took place at Centennial Park and Camp Magruder, featuring military maneuvers, political speeches, and carnival attractions. Additional events were also held at Lafitte. On weekdays, trains would leave 9th and Market Street at 7 a.m. and stop for passengers at any street corner crossing where passengers waited. The primary stops were at Sam Mass's store, 27th Street, the Roundhouse, and of course Centennial Park. The tickets were 10 cents and could be purchased at Mason's and Phillips bookstores, Sam Mass's store, and Roundhouse. Fares paid on a train were 10 cents each way. 1,000 people could be comfortably seated on each train. On Sundays, trains left 9th and Market Street at 10 a.m. All Sunday trains ran through to Lafitte. Return tickets were 25 cents. In 1890, the John Seeley Hospital was constructed at Avenue A and 9th Street, just east of the G&W tracks. Following this, in 1891, the still-standing Ashbel Smith Building was erected across the tracks from the John Seeley Hospital, marking the establishment of the University of Texas Medical Branch. Avenue B, also known as the Strand, had by then gained a reputation of being the Wall Street of the South. In 1891, the Galveston and Western acquired a new industry to serve when the Nottingham Lace Factory was established. The factory, named after the lace industry in Nottingham, England, produced lace curtains and mosquito netting. The factory utilized the abundant cotton stored in Galveston warehouses, with the humid sea breezes helping to prevent the thread from becoming dry and brittle. Approximately a mile from the Lafitte terminus, an entire community was planned and supporting structures were constructed. These included stores, saloons, boarding houses, restaurants, and residences. A watering station was built for the railroad, possibly marking the line's first real depot. A turnaround Y was also located at the site. The factory building measured 300 feet by 50 feet, costing $120,000 to construct. The opening ceremonies were held on January 14, 1892. Little Susie brought in excursionists and dignitaries including John Watson, the Grand Master of the Texas Masons. Watson led the cornerstone laying ceremonies. Lace production at Nottingham continued for about 3 years. A major economic depression may have contributed to the factory's failure. The 1900 hurricane destroyed most of the Nottingham structures, and the 1915 storm wiped out what remained. Following the hurricanes, the land was leveled and returned to agricultural use. According to the aforementioned Texas Railroad Commission letter, in 1892, the Galveston and Western Railroad Company began selling off its narrow gauge railroad equipment. In 1893, there was an attempt to build or purchase terminal facilities and wharves on Galveston Bay, but this development went nowhere. On May 21, 1895, the property was leased to the Galveston, LaPorte, and Houston Railway, but they never took possession. The Galveston and Western struggled to continue operations. On September 8, 1900, Galveston was hit by the worst natural disaster in the history of the United States, in the form of a great hurricane. What remained of Little Susie's tracks in the city played a role in building the seawall by hauling in sand and building materials. Despite the help, the line would be severed at the trestle from 9th Street to Avenue N. When the G&W sought to obtain an alternative right-of-way, city officials were opposed. They even passed an ordinance restricting the line from using any portion of its streets. On September 22, 1904, the G&W filed a suit in the 56th District Court for $200,000 in damages, charging that the city had severed the tracks. The G&W agreed to drop the suit if a new right-of-way was granted. The suit dragged on until it was eventually dropped in the 1920s. In 1902, the 13 miles of railroad from the city limits to Lafitte's Grove was abandoned. Approximately 6 miles of standard gauge track inside the city limits were still maintained. On July 30th, 1909, Walter Gresham, who was co-owner of the G&W, announced that the Little Susie would be used in the construction of the barracks at Fort Crockett. The line was to acquire new equipment and make improvements to its right-of-way. The Galveston Electric Company opposed this development, and the dispute was never settled. In later years, after the G&W Company no longer existed, a spur would be extended into Fort Crockett. About a mile of the remaining track was leased to the Galveston, Houston, and Henderson Railroad in 1918, and the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe Railroad leased the remaining 5. In 1923, there were only 4 miles of usable track remaining, and it was purchased by the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe. The last of Little Susie's tracks were removed in the 1960s. It's very likely there are rails and remnants of the line still buried along the island. Nowadays, we can only visualize the experience of rolling along the beach behind a chugging steam locomotive, swaying in open cars. We can imagine the sea breeze and the smell of the engine smoke drifting in the briny air. We can hear the laughter of children and seagulls, see pelicans flying in formation overhead while the spoonbills strike at frogs and minnows in the tidal pools and bayous. I bet those picnic baskets were well guarded in anticipation of a banquet at Lafitte's Grove.